Alright, welcome in you guys. It's already 7 o'clock. I can't believe it. I was really rushing to get ready for this. So welcome back to Reading Against Regimes, otherwise known as R.A.R, where we read and analyze dystopian novels and compare them to modern events, particularly in the US, where I am currently residing. Um, so this week, we are going into chapters 4 and 5, and there are really two main themes that are being hit upon in these chapters. Um, in the last couple of R.A.R sessions, we have been covering about 6 themes per chapter, something like that. So this is a little bit unusual this week that we really only have 2 major themes that we're covering, but there is a lot to go through. Um, so the first theme revolves around the Ministry of Truth, which is Winston's job. Winston is the protagonist of our story. Um, and the Ministry of Truth is essentially a records and news altering facility. So let's see, that was theme number 1. And then theme number 2, I'm excited to get into because I've been talking about this just a little bit in each of the past ones, but it wasn't time to get into it yet, and it finally is now. We get to talk about newspeak. So newspeak is the language that is being constructed for for Oceania, or by the politicians of the party, and by certain employed workers of the party specifically. And so we are finally going to get to talk about that a little bit more. And that one I've been really waiting on because we do have a lot to compare that to in modern times. So I'm going to scroll back through. I have my own page of notes open. You're not going to see that on the screen. Hi, Allie. Welcome in. Okay, so first, let's start with chapter 4. Sorry, for some reason, I kept thinking that we were in chapters 5 and 6, not 4 and 5 this week. I don't know why I keep getting that confused. Hello, Rowan. I see you. So in chapter 4, we get a detailed description of Winston's job, and he works at the Ministry of Truth. It is so called. This is the news and records and statistics altering facility. So basically, he describes kind of his cubicle that he works in, and the main thing that I want to point out about his office area is that he says that embedded into the walls of every single cubicle in this office, there are these things called memory holes, which is literally where you dispose of any documents or any record of the documents that have been requested to be destroyed or altered. Like it says here, when one knew that any document was due for destruction, or even when one saw a scrap of waste paper lying about, it was an automatic action to lift the flap of the nearest memory hole and drop it in, whereupon it would be whirled away on a current of warm air to the enormous furnaces, which were hidden somewhere in the recesses of the building. And so when they're kind of describing Winston's job, they talk about he has received a certain list of documents that need to be altered. And these documents varied. Hello, Artemis! I see you! Hello, hello! So these documents could be a lot of different things. They could be newspaper articles, they could be magazines, they could be photographs or captions on photographs. Winston only receives text items as far as we have read in here. And so let's see, what else did I miss? The messages he had received referred to articles or news items which, for one reason or another, it was thought necessary to alter, or, as the official phrase had it, to rectify. Winston's job was to rectify the original figures by making them agree with the later ones. So he is given, very oftentimes, he is given statistics or projections that the party made about certain things in the economy or in the wars that were happening, And so basically the party would predict, this is where the enemy army is going to strike, and this is the area that they're going to ignore. And so they would be wrong about these projections, and Winston essentially receives a document that says, hey, you need to change this text, and then destroy the original evidence. To make it appear as though the party was omniscient, that they are able to predict everything, that they're always right. And this also happens in terms of statistics too. So another example that we're given in this chapter is that Winston is given a number of boots that were created by the economy for people of Oceania who need these boots desperately. Because people are walking around barefoot, apparently. And, we've gone over the themes of, like, dilapidation and scarcity in previous chapters. So the party reports essentially, we project that the factories are going to output this many boots. But apparently their numbers were so terribly off from what was actually produced in the end. And so Winston has to adjust those numbers and make it a little bit closer. But here's where he's actually allowed to not make the party 100% correct, but instead what he is supposed to do is he's supposed to write the number as being slightly lower than what the reported output was, to make it look like, output was even better than we expected. Things are so great. We're doing so fantastic here in Oceania. Everyone has boots. In fact, there are boots to spare. So this is Winston's job. This is what he is doing in the Ministry of Truth. Essentially, he is just rewriting the past in order to make it match up with the future that the party wants to project. Another quote that I saved here was just kind of describing the types of documents that Winston would be requested to edit, or anyone else in the Ministry of Truth for that matter. So the process was used for newspapers, books, articles, movies, audio clips, photos, and every kind of literature or documentation which might conceivably hold any political or ideological significance. And let's see. So I did kind of cover the memory holes, which are used for destroying the evidence. Loud and wrong. How so? Tell me how I am wrong. I'm literally just reading from 1984 and analyzing it. I would like to see you actually provide some sort of evidence, because the thing is, I have actually been not only reading the book itself, but also doing additional research to support anything that I end up reporting on modern times, which I haven't even gotten to that point yet. So, good job. Good job for you being loud and wrong. So, Winston's supposed to be destroying the evidence, and putting these documents into the memory holes. But there's also, and I kind of also wanted to touch on something that sounds very much akin to when we... Oh, Artemis is asking, that's accurate to the book. Yes, to 1984. So yes, this is, I'm right now, I'm just talking about what's actually happening in the book, but I'm about to start comparing it to what's happening in the modern times. No. Oh, Artemis, I wasn't talking to you. There's somebody. So I'm running this stream on 3 different platforms. So this stream is currently airing on YouTube, Twitch, and TikTok. So I'm reading comment sections. So when I'm leaning over here, I'm reading TikTok comments. And then on y'all's page, I can see Twitch and YouTube simultaneously, but I don't think y'all are able to see the other chats that are happening at the same time, which is a little unfortunate. I kind of wish that I could like mesh all the chats together, because I think that would be more helpful. But let's see. Hold on. I was talking about memory holes, destroying the evidence. Oh, right. And then I was about to talk about what we're kind of seeing in the modern world with the concept of banned books. This is where something like 1984's Ministry of Truth comes in. So they describe um, a different section than the one that Winston works in, and it says the largest section of the records department consisted simply of persons whose duty it was to track down and collect all copies of books, newspapers, and other documents which had been superseded and were due for destruction. Um, and that's very similar to what we're kind of seeing with anytime they want to like ban a book, which as far as I understand, we're not actually burning the books in the US, but it's just they kind of get like put on a list and then they're not supposed to like read them in schools and stuff like that anymore. Um, but you know, we could end up going in that direction eventually where they're just trying to burn copies of anything that may lead to resistance, that may lead to a population being more educated. Um, and that's kind of what Orwell is really wanting to harp on here, because I also do want to remind for anyone who was not here for any of the previous streams on this, Orwell was writing specifically in criticism of Stalin's regime. So um, Stalin was a totalitarian, and he was an incredibly paranoid man, essentially, and he he believed that within his cabinets that there were many spies, and he did not trust anyone, um, and he employed a military police force, which we're familiar with, right? We have our own frozen task force, um, and that's like what Stalin had, and so um, he did not trust anyone, and he definitely did not tolerate in the slightest any sort of speaking out against him or any sort of revolt. And so that's why 1984 has such dark themes, is because it's focusing on those times. Um, Now, let me see. What was the next thing that I wanted to cover? Okay, so I talked about this a little bit when I was talking about the boots example. But the next thing I wanted to mention of Winston's job is just the idea of the faked statistics. And so, the boots, like he ends up writing, 57 million boots have been produced when the projected output was, or when the quoted output, which we don't even know is real, was 62 million. And so he was writing that the projection was just slightly lower to make it look like the economy was doing better than it was, even better than the projections of the party. But then he later says, though, of statistics in general, he says, statistics were just as much a fantasy in their original version as in their rectified version. A great deal of the time you were expected to make them up out of your head. So Winston's just saying, we can't even really trust statistics because most of the time people are just making them up. And I know that there are definitely a lot of us, whenever we watch any sort of news, but especially the more biased news platforms like Fox News, and we see statistics come out, and we're not like we've learned by now that we need to be second guessing every statistic that we see, which is really frustrating because the news is supposed to just report facts. And so we're kind of losing a sense of trust. Um, and we also know that statistics can be skewed, and this is just not even specific to one news platform. This is just something that many different media outlets have been doing, is like skewing statistics to make something seem like it either has or does not have a particular correlation in order to push a particular person's message. Um, and so that's a huge part of Winston's job. Now, let me see. So then what Winston actually says. So he was supposed to write, or he wrote, 57 million boots have been produced. The projected output was actually 62 million. And he says, it was very likely no boots had been produced at all, and that every quarter astronomical numbers of boots were produced on paper, while perhaps half the population of Oceania went barefoot. And I know I'm really feeling that right now with the gas prices going up as much as they have. The last um, the last stream that I did, which I guess was about 3 weeks ago now, um, I had reported that the gas prices had gone up about 80% in my area within a span of 2 weeks, from the start of the war on Iran to a couple of weeks later. The prices of gas had jumped about 80% in my area, and people were reporting similar numbers. They were somewhere around anywhere between like 75 to 80 something percent. It was somewhere around there. Um, and um, what really frustrates me so much is every time the news is spouting off about all of these new jobs that have been created, and and we can't trust those statistics at all. I feel like, because I don't even know what jobs they're talking about for one. But it definitely does not seem to be jobs that are paying a livable wage, and I don't know if it's they're just reporting from particularly big, um, like, well, monopolies, really, like if they're just reporting from like Amazon and stuff like that, and Apple and such. But I feel like we have lost our ability to trust that a bunch of new jobs have been created, and I do feel like this is very similar to the Boots dilemma. It's like, oh, they're reporting there are just so many jobs, meanwhile, so many of us are barely making it paycheck to paycheck. Um, and so, what I want to continue with, though, with the Ministry of Truth, was I did actually want to start connecting this discussion to how modern AI is potentially going to be impacting this process. Um, last the last stream, I had already talked about how a lot of history has been significantly whitewashed. Um, and gentler language has been used around colonizing, and white people have been given credit for people of color's inventions and things like that. Or we're glorifying people who were slave owners, um, and stuff like that. So in a way, like, our history is already being rewritten, and this is, the history textbooks. Um, oh, sorry, Allie, I'm just now seeing your comment, and there are so many job scams out there right now. Yes, very good point. Yeah, like, if you've ever used, sorry, going back just a little bit to talking about how we can't trust the job statistics. If you've ever used any online job hunting platform like Indeed or Monster or LinkedIn or any of those, you know how many times you have read a really fishy sounding job description and you applied and got ghosted, or something like that. And we do know, we're very well aware that jobs will be created in a system at times to make it look like a company is hiring when they've already promised the position to somebody within. So there's not even actually a job available. Um, so going back now to talking about the whitewashing of history and how our history textbooks are already being altered in a similar manner, um, to what Winston's job is. And they do describe another section of the Ministry of Truth where they say there were huge printing shops with their sub-editors, their typography experts, and their elaborately equipped studios for the faking of photographs. There was the teleprogram section with its engineers, its producers, and its teams of actors specifically chosen for their skill in imitating voices. Does that sound familiar? So that's basically Hollywood. The process of altering content is not new. Um, we've had Photoshop, and at first a lot of people were just kind of using it to make funny stuff, but then we saw people get really good at Photoshop to make an image look very realistic. Um, there's CGI that we see in films, to make it appear as though there are certain creatures there that don't exist. Um, there's voice acting. So this like imitation or being chosen for their skill in imitating voices, that's not new. We literally hire voice actors to do exactly that. And just look at shows like South Park. Like their whole thing is making fun of real people, and they don't have those actual people voicing those characters. They have somebody else who's really good at imitating them. And then also the concept of like stunt doubles, so it makes our favorite actors and actresses look a lot more talented than they really are. So alteration isn't new, but what is new with AI is the speed of this production. So with Photoshop, people were having to work hours and hours just for one image, whereas now AI can generate a new image within a matter of seconds. And we've already seen how that power was used for evil whenever, Musk was advertising that Grok can take off people's clothes, and so people started undressing women and minors, in particular, and because they were able to do it super quickly just by typing in a prompt. They didn't even have to have the talent or the skill of being able to use Photoshop or anything like that. They literally were just able to type a few words and maybe run the prompt a couple of times until they got to the desired result. But still, it was so much faster. Um, with AI videos, I've never experimented with that, so I don't know how long it takes to generate videos. But I did hear from someone I know who was like playing with that. Um, and she told me that generating the videos at least did take a bit longer, but still, it's the same concept of like you're able to type in a prompt. I think you can even submit images for generating the videos. So if you want like your face but on a different body or something like that, you can generate different videos with AI. And she said she had to create several videos before she got something that even looked remotely realistic, and it was only a few seconds long. But we know that AI is developing rapidly, and we know that it is getting better and better all the time. Um, and so making fake images, videos, audio bites is becoming a much faster process. And the first thought that I had was, well, what if, because usually if you Photoshop an image, there are people who can like analyze the image, right? And they can see, they're able to tell that it was Photoshopped. But what if AI gets so good that we're no longer able to distinguish what is AI? And at first that was terrifying because we're like, okay, well, people can create footage and images of instances that never happened. But I think maybe the scarier point is actually the opposite of that. And what if the point is that AI gets so good, and we all know that it's so good, that it generates doubt? What if the scarier part of AI is that we start to doubt the truth? And it feels very timely, and I know this is very conspiracy theory sounding, but with the Epstein files being released in this very awkward, staggered format, we've seen actual images that were pulled from famous people who have hung out with Epstein, and we've seen some of the images of them hanging out with some of these girls who were either named as victims or suspected as victims. And so we're seeing actual documents that come out. But what if AI blowing up right now is to make us doubt those documents? I don't know. Oh, Allie, I'm seeing your comment. Let me just read. Let's see. I'm watching the boys, and a big reveal was just played off as that's probably AI. You never know 100%. Yeah. Um, and I think that making us doubt the truth is even scarier than believing in a lie. Um, and people can use it to their advantage. Yeah, 100%. Um, so I don't know that I have that much more to add on AI, but that was just a point that I wanted to drive home as a part of the Ministry of Truth, because right now I'm speculating. I don't know that much about AI and how it works. I don't know how good it is at this point in time, but I just know from what I have seen, I know that I'm scrolling in my news feed and I'm having to second guess every single video that I see and be like, is that animal video real? You know, like did those animals really do that? Because I get pushed a lot of like silly cat and dog compilations, right? Because it's like, it's funny, it's cute, and I just remember for the longest time, like, I'd see a cat compilation come up and be like, oh, well, I've seen these video clips like a million times. Lately, I'm seeing a lot of new video clips, and I don't know if it's because people are better at like catching their animals on film, or are they using AI to generate these? And I'm trying to block as many AI videos as possible. Um, so, now, we're almost at the halfway mark of the stream, so I do want to make sure that I switch over into our second major theme, because this one I was pretty excited to talk about. And the second theme of chapters 4 and 5 was talking about newspeak. So newspeak is the abbreviated language that the party is essentially shaving down and trying to employ into their populations. And fortunately, in 1984, Orwell says very plainly what the purpose of newspeak is. We don't have to do this like intense literary analysis. He gives us the answers. And how he does it is he takes us into a scene where Winston goes to the workplace like canteen, which is essentially their like little cafeteria area, and he meets up with one of his coworkers, Simi, and Simi is working on the 11th edition of the Newspeak dictionary. And Simi is speaking very passionately about it, and he's saying, this is going to be like the dictionary to finish up the language. Like this is going to be the one that's going to make the change. And he says, we're destroying words, scores of them, hundreds of them every day. We're cutting the language down to the bone. And he also says, Newspeak is the only language in the world whose vocabulary gets smaller every year. I did underline some examples. It may take me just a second to flip to it because it was too hard for me to like type this out in my notes because of the way that it was written in the book. So I'm just going to go. So here's one of the work requests that Winston receives, and I'm going to read it in Newspeak and Old Speak, which is just how we speak English right now. So in Newspeak, it says, Times 3.12.83, reporting, BB, day order, double plus ungood, refs, unpersons, rewrite, full-wise, upsub, antifiling. So you can see how the Newspeak language is very abrupt, very like, percussive, whereas translated to our language, what all of that said was, the reporting of Big Brother's order for the day in the Times of December 3rd, 1983 is extremely unsatisfactory and makes references to non-existent persons. Rewrite it in full and submit your draft to higher authority before filing. So now I know that's kind of hard to just memorize that all in your head like at one moment. So I'm just going to compare particularly one of the words that's in here. Uh, in Newspeak, the word is double plus ungood. This translates to extremely unsatisfactory. And Simi does talk about this, and he talks about like, oh, well, this is just removing like unnecessary language. If one word will describe what we need, why do we need the other? So he's trying to eliminate unnecessary adjectives, verbs, stuff like that. And so when you say, like, to say extremely unsatisfactory, and you write it as double plus ungood, so he's just saying, okay, well, we know what the word good means, and we want to describe a word that means the opposite, so it's ungood. Um, but now we're wanting to say this is really not good, so we're going to say plus ungood. But no, this is severely, extremely not good. So then we say double plus ungood. And so that's just how the Newspeak language is written. But then Simi starts getting into what the actual purpose of doing this is. Why are they even needing to shave down the language in the first place? Why do they not want language to have nuance and beauty and creativity? He says, if you have a word like good, what need is there for a word like bad? So taking away people's power to describe anything that they feel unpleasantly about. Because now everything that... Oh, hold on. Wait. Ew, there's an AI summary on my TikTok. Go away. Ew. Ew. So they're trying to take away people's ability to speak against the party. And it goes even further. He says, the whole aim of Newspeak is to narrow the range of thought. In the end, we shall make thought crime literally impossible because there will be no words in which to express it. I'll remind y'all that thought crime is literally what it sounds like. It is the crime of thinking anything in resistance to the party. And yes, they deem it as an actual crime, and people get either executed or gulagged for this. And this was definitely in reference to Stalin's prisons in Siberia that he would have people sent to, and the intention was for them to either freeze or starve to death. Let's see. And Ali says, I think cutting down the language in the books relates to the continued underfunding of schools, too. Oh, interesting. Okay. So, I could see that meaning a couple of things. So, if they're, for one, I could see them, like, actually, literally just putting fewer words in books because they don't want to have to use as much ink and as much paper to like print the books. But then on the other side too, like the underfunding of schools, the fact that maybe our kids' education is what's actually being pared down. And I'm sure that was more so what you meant. But correct me if I missed something there. And so now we're talking about how there will be no words in which to express your thought crime. They want people to not even be able at all to think rebellious thoughts. It says, even the slogans will change. How could you have a slogan like, freedom is slavery, when the concept of freedom has been abolished? Yeah. Heavy shit right there. So, like I said, one thing that I really love about 1984 is that Orwell is not trying to show off as a writer. He's not trying to make us go through all this, like, mental frazzlement, and like he's not trying to be super sneaky with everything that he's saying. I love that he just comes right out and says it. He says it very plainly, and so that's why 1984 is like a great book for anyone who's not super familiar with reading dystopias or anything else like that. But because it's a book that literally everyone can read and understand very easily, and his message is entirely clear. So we're wanting people to not be able to say that things are bad. We're trying to take away the word bad. It's like it's either good or it's ungood, which still sounds like good. And it's kind of, we're just trying to gaslight people with that. And freedom is slavery is like one of the party slogans, and which we already know is just like outright gaslighting in itself. But then he's saying, well, we're trying to abolish the concept of freedom. We don't want people to ever know how good things once were. We don't want them to even think about anything other than the existence that we have created. And so, why even talk about newspeak and compare it to modern times? One huge thing that I saw when I started creating content for fun on TikTok in 2020, I got to a point in 2021 where I was like, hey, I think I'd like to actually do something meaningful with this, and I would like to put out some kind of message that is helpful, is educational, and so I decided to create like a mental health series, and it was short-lived. I didn't end up creating very much, but I would dress as depression and anxiety, and I would just do these like different skits with them over different TikTok sounds. And I noticed at one point that the hashtag for depression had been banned on TikTok, and it probably still is, honestly. I haven't even tried to use it in so long, because like it was banned for a really long time, like years at least, if it's not still banned. You cannot use hashtag depression on that platform. And we're seeing this heavy social media censorship, and we're having to literally change the words that we use, because the platforms have decided that using anything even remotely negative is not allowed, and we shouldn't be we shouldn't be saying those things. It's too heavy, it's too nasty for the platform. And I don't know if it's because they're trying to like make these apps safe for kids or whatever, but they just kind of end up blocking things that we need to talk about, and it mostly ends up being about like mental health issue concerns. So depression, we can't say that anymore. We call it the big sad. We can't say murdered or killed anymore. We're supposed to say unalived. We can't talk about suicide anymore. It's got to be a sewer slide, a trip on the sewer slide. Rape has become great. Pedophile has become PDF file, and there are many other examples. And these alternate words that we've substituted to talk about these very heavy subjects, they're cutesified. Okay, it's like, oh, you're depressed. Oh no, I just have a case of the big sad today. And it's having the same effect as turning the word bad into ungood in 1984. And it makes these issues sound lighter than they are, and that's a problem. Because for one thing, we deserve to have a space to talk about mental health issues. We deserve to have a space to talk about crimes that have been committed against people. And we're literally being denied the words for that at a time when it is so much more important than ever before. People are severely depressed and anxious all the time because they're trying to live paycheck to paycheck. People are having to live in their cars. People can't afford rent. Their one crisis, one emergency away from bankruptcy, and yet we're supposed to cutesify these problems. I don't want to cutesify anything, you know? I just want to talk about it how it is. We we deserve to be able to face that. We deserve to be able to have the dignity, um, and to have people understand the impact of what we have gone through. Um, so that was why talking about newspeak was so important, and that was just one example. Um, but oh, I'm sorry. I also forgot to mention too that whenever you decide to use these heavier terms, the real terms, to describe things that have happened to people, your content gets a significantly reduced reach in some places. Um, and TikTok is like one of the worst about this. And so, I'm surprised. I wouldn't be surprised if they just like shut down my stream over here at one point. But, because I'm talking about these really nasty, horrible things. The thing is, ever since this US conglomerate purchased TikTok earlier this year, we have seen this social media censorship get way heavier, but now just outright on things that the US conglomerate doesn't like. And it's not even with any guise of like, oh, we're protecting anyone. This is just simply, we don't want people talking about this. And guess what? Any hashtags pertaining to anti-fascism, abolish ICE, anti-Trump, the Epstein files, free Palestine, hello, familiar, remember that one? These hashtags have been reported by numerous content creators at this point to either cause glitching issues with their videos, get them shadow banned, or severely reduce the reach of their videos. And especially the bigger content creators, they're able to see this a little more obviously because they know what metrics they're used to pulling in with their videos. They have a bigger and more consistent fan base that engages with their content. And so they said, no, anytime that we have used any of these kinds of hashtags or it has been too obvious what we've been saying in our videos, our reach has been severely impacted. We're seeing huge losses in engagement compared to what we normally receive. And so that's the problem with social media censorship is like, you start to take it too far and now it's just whoever's feelings are getting hurt, and that's ridiculous and we shouldn't be having to deal with it. It's complete bullshit. So, Ministry of Truth, which was the altering of history. So we talked about the altering of history and we talked about newspeak. Those were the two major themes. But there was like a minor theme that got touched on a little bit in chapters 4 and 5, and it was one that we had also touched on in a previous stream of this series. And this is just talking about the only people who are protected by fascism. And there is a contrast that is made when Winston describes the people who thrive in fascism, or thrive as best as you actually can in an oppressive society, versus the people who get tossed aside, who are not the ones who you expect. And it's so important that we pay attention to this because currently we are seeing women who have been holding the water for this patriarchy in the US starting to get cast aside. So, now Winston says the people who thrive under these conditions, he describes them as beetle-like. He says they're little dumpy men growing stout very early in life with short legs, swift scuttling movements, and fat inscrutable faces with very small eyes. It was the type that seemed to flourish best under the dominion of the party. And what he had described in previous chapters, in chapters 2 and 3, was he had basically said that you know, only these completely like idiotic, um, idiotic people who are so willing and able to swallow these new truths every day. So every alteration of history that's been made, people who just accept it without even questioning what they remembered previously being the case. He says those are the only people who can thrive. That's what these beetle like people are. And I didn't have enough time to go further into the symbolism, but I was wondering if he was trying to make a reference specifically to dung beetles, because they just like eat a bunch of shit. They just take it. um, but I didn't have time to go and see if that was his intention with the beetle description, because I thought that was kind of an interesting thing to pick. Because I know a lot of people would be like, if they saw just like a bunch of beetles scuttling around in their home, like in their living space that they've been keeping clean, they'd be like, ew, that's gross. So he really has, he really describes these people to be like as disgusting as he can fathom. But then Simi, the person who was so enthusiastically speaking about being a part of editing this Newspeak dictionary, um, he says Simi will be vaporized. Um, he says he is too intelligent. He sees too clearly and speaks too plainly. The party does not like such people. Sometimes the loudest supporters are the ones who are going to be so easily discarded. Nell, hello! I see you. So currently I'm talking about the only kinds of people who can actually survive fascism, whereas the ones that you think would survive it, the people who are like the loudest supporters of it, are the first ones to be discarded. Um, so one of our most recent examples of this is Kristi Noem, okay? Because I wanted to talk about women who are, and the term that we've been using is holding water for the patriarchy. Um, so Kristi Noem, she was fired late last month from, she was the Homeland Security Secretary, and she had a couple of things going on. So she was like one of the main people, I guess, overseeing the deployment of ICE in Minnesota. She called Alex Preddy and Renee Good domestic terrorists before anything had even actually been investigated into their deaths. And, we know very well by now that those were just outright murders by ICE agents. Especially in Renee Good's videos, I felt those were the most obvious of being like, yeah, that was a murder that just happened. They murdered her. And, so Kristi Noem, she was definitely very openly accusing these people. She was very openly being like, oh, like anyone who's trying to resist what we're doing with ICE, is a domestic terrorist. And then she also like had this like unapproved ad campaign that was encouraging self-deportation, and I was having a hard time finding more information on that, but I think that was what like ended up upsetting Trump to the point of wanting to fire her. And sorry, allergies. But so she was in a very high position. We thought, she would have been protected, right, by the current oligarchy in place. We would have thought she would have been safe. She was very vocally supporting them and, all of this, but then she gets fired. And that's how things are going to go. And I don't even necessarily want to like get up on a platform and be like, and that's why women should be thinking about, if they're supporting the patriarchy, because honestly, if women are still supporting the patriarchy in the U.S. right now, they're probably too far gone. They're probably too far gone. So I don't have a message for them. Honestly, they're gonna get discarded. Karma's coming for them, and it's gonna be served by the very people whose asses they kissed. So what I will say though is that I guess anyone who wants to be a blind supporter, even as like, you know, as Winston describes, well, the beetle-like ones, they're gonna thrive and whatnot, you know, because they can just swallow everything, and that's like what we're seeing with like a lot of the red cap cultists is that no matter how many contradictions there are in Trump's statements versus like what's happening now, like what he promised to do for us versus what's happening now, with gas prices and war, you know, these things that have been added that, you know, he said were never going to be a problem for us in the first place. Um, but still, anyone who is a blind supporter is at risk. Um, that's that's just how these regimes work. Um, Once they feel like maybe you're gonna try to oh, sorry, I just saw another comment come in. Let me see. Um, yeah, they don't care about women and children like they alleged. Yeah, exactly. they they just care about having more people to work and support them because they don't want to do work. They just want to accumulate a bunch of slaves under them. That's what they want. They want people who will work themselves to the bone for them. But anyone who may start to want a little bit of their own power, as soon as that happens, they are going to get discarded. It's classic narcissism, okay? Like the narcissist, they're just going to build you up and they're going to praise you and say, oh, you're so wonderful because, you know, you're going to be feeding their ego and whatnot. But then one day they're just going to discard you because that's what they do. And yes, we are ruled by narcissists. We have a narcissistic oligarchy. That is what's happening here. These people, they think the sun shines out of their ass, okay? Like, it is already 7:52. Fortunately, I did cover like the main things that I wanted to talk about, but there was a long quote that I wanted to end on, and I don't know if that's necessarily going to be the trend that I do for every single stream, but so far it just kind of seems like that's how it's going so far. So I wanted to save a long quote because what this quote may seem at first glance irrelevant to what we've been talking about, but it has to do with the effects of being politically gaslit by your government for so long, and especially for the younger generations being born now, whenever things are really horrible. If things continue to go horribly, if these younger generations grow up and that's all that they ever know is that things are terrible, that can breed a sort of compliance. And so that is why I chose this quote from page 59, which says, and first, this is Winston describing the canteen, the cafeteria area of his workplace. He said, had it always been like this? Had food always tasted like this? He looked around the canteen, a low-ceilinged, crowded room, its walls grimy from the contact of innumerable bodies, battered metal tables and chairs, placed so close together that you sat with elbows touching, bent spoons, dented trays, coarse white mugs, all surfaces greasy, grime in every crack, and a sourish composite smell of bad gin and bad coffee, and metallic stew and dirty clothes. Always in your stomach and in your skin, there was a sort of protest, a feeling that you had been cheated of something that you had a right to. It was true that he had no memories of anything greatly different. So he's describing this canteen, which is just one example of dilapidation that gets covered in this book, and they do continue to touch on this theme. He's describing just this one space even, being like, the food is disgusting. It's this like grayish weird stew that they're being served. Everything really smells bad. There's grease and grime everywhere. It's disgusting. And he doesn't remember anything being that different ever in his life, but he's still in the pit of his stomach. He has a feeling that he's been cheated of something. And I know that our younger generation, they're going to start feeling that way. I'm a millennial, and we started off with great, amazing childhoods, and we were promised the world. You know, as long as we went to college and got a job in our field, like we were going to be set for life. Everything was going to be fine. And then the economy kept crashing over and over. Yeah, and Belly, I feel cheated as hell, dude. Yeah, yeah. I feel extremely cheated, especially as a chronically ill person who has not been able to afford a diagnosis for 10 years. It's, yeah, I feel extremely cheated. Healthcare here is abysmal. This society does not support its citizens. It supports the elite. That is what it is built for. It supports the people who run these monopolies. It supports these people who want to destroy the environment. And for what? We can't live if our environment is destroyed. And yet they're being allowed to do this anyway. People are not being held accountable for atrocious crimes that they have committed. The Epstein files, we're still talking about that. We're not forgetting that. We need to remain conscious, willfully conscious of everything that has been taken from us. And especially for those of us millennials, we need to tap back into what we remember from our childhood, because we need to always remember what has been taken from us. Otherwise, we become complicit and we stay silent and we allow things to keep being taken from us. And that's what they want. They want us to just submit. They don't want us to ever even realize that things could be good. But the fact of the matter is, if you live in the US, especially if you've never traveled anywhere else, you need to somehow find a way to connect with what life is like in other countries. Particularly a few of the European nations. The ones that have health care for their citizens, where their citizens are not having to pay thousands of dollars for an ambulance ride to the hospital because of an emergency. You know, you need to look at what life is like in other countries where the citizens are happier, and you need to realize that we could have had those things. And we are owed those things. A government is meant to serve its people, and our government is taking from us. And I think that is a good enough place to end it on tonight. I'm glad that I didn't try to add any more to my notes, or else I would not have gotten through it all. But I do hope you guys enjoyed this series. As always, the entire video will be uploaded to YouTube automatically once I close the stream. It just takes a couple hours to process, I believe, before it's fully available for viewing. And then I've also enabled it so that it will be available on Twitch, but it's only up there for 7 days after the original posting date. So always check YouTube. The R.A.R. stream, this stream, Reading Against Regimes, I'm doing this on the 2nd and 4th Mondays of every month, so sometimes that means that there will be a couple of weeks in between streams, but in this case, I'm sorry, not a couple of weeks. Sometimes there may be 3 weeks in between streams. In this case, there are only 2 for the next stream, and I'm tending to get through 2 chapters at a time. I'm trying to do better, but it's been really, really hard, and it actually does take me a long time to sit down and not only do the reading, but write the lesson plans and do any supporting research to be able to talk about how it compares in the modern world. Because I do always want to be accurate. I don't just want to be slinging my opinions. I am speaking from a place of analyzing what the events that are happening, and you know, like for the ICE shootings, I watched the videos, as painful as that was. You know, I'm trying to be as accurate as possible. Um, but yeah, so the next one is in a couple of weeks. I hope. Oh gosh, R.A.R. Hold on, TikTok just got mad at me. It's like, no, you've been talking too long. You need to stop. It do what it do. But anyway, let's hope that there's not any terrible news this week. I think we deserve a week to go without something bad happening again. And I hope you guys are able to enjoy the rest of your week. So, thanks for tuning in, everyone, especially my friends who popped in and said hello. Thank you so, so much. That means a lot to me.